I've never been the type to share personal issues publicly. I'm a private man, always have been. My job demands a certain composure, a professionalism that doesn't leave much room for airing grievances or bearing my soul. But after everything that's happened, I feel like I need to put this out there, if only to get it off my chest. I've been married to Sandra for nearly 15 years. We met through mutual friends and hit it off right away. She was smart, driven, and beautiful. Everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We built a life together, one that, at least until recently, I'd have described as solid. I run a business, and Sandra's always been supportive. Or at least, that's what I thought. Maybe I was naive. Looking back now, I see things I missed, little signs I should have noticed but didn't. It's amazing what you can ignore when you believe in someone. Our marriage had its routines, and I thought those routines were signs of stability. Every Sunday, we'd host a family dinner, sometimes with her family, sometimes with mine. Our families became close over the years, and I always made it a priority to keep those relationships strong. Sandra seemed to value it too, or so I thought. We even had weekly date nights, a tradition I was proud of, a ritual that reminded us both, or so I believed, of why we fell in love in the first place. But a few months ago, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Sandra's job had always kept her busy, but she'd never been the type to go overboard with it. We had a balance. Then, out of the blue, she began working longer hours, attending more networking events, and volunteering for these corporate retreats and seminars. She'd always talk about how important they were for her career, about how they'd help her get ahead. I supported her, of course. I'd always respected her ambition. But this was different. I started noticing other changes too. She'd always been elegant, but recently, she'd been dressing up more. New clothes, high heels, bold lipstick she never used to wear. Sandra used to be the type to throw on a comfortable sweater and jeans after work. But now, even on weekends, she'd be fully dolled up, saying she was meeting with the team or some new mentor she'd connected with at work. It felt off, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. We'd been together for so long that I trusted her implicitly. Or maybe I just wanted to believe there was nothing wrong. The phone was the next thing. Sandra and I had always had an open phone policy, not because we'd agreed on it, but because neither of us had anything to hide. But lately, she'd been glued to her phone, even bringing it with her to the bathroom. I'd catch her scrolling through messages late at night, and she'd close the screen as soon as I walked in. I told myself it was just work. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, the guy who thinks every glance at a phone is a sign of betrayal. But it was getting harder and harder to ignore. One night, we were getting ready for bed, and I noticed her phone was still sitting on the nightstand, face down as usual. Something told me to look at it, just a gut feeling I couldn't shake. But I didn't. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had changed. Had I done something wrong? Had I missed something? I turned over in bed, looking at Sandra as she slept, and felt a strange hollowness settle in my chest. For the first time in our marriage, I realized I couldn't say with certainty that I knew what was going on in her life. And that terrified me. A few weeks went by, and the uneasiness only grew. Sandra started missing our Sunday dinners. She claimed she had to stay late at the office, or that she'd been asked to attend a last-minute event with her boss. She'd apologize, of course, telling me how much she missed our family time, but then she'd skip out again the next week. Family dinners had always been sacred to us, and now she was missing them without a second thought. It felt like a slap in the face, but I told myself she was just busy. Maybe it was a phase. Then there was the night that really set everything into motion. I'd just come home from work, exhausted, and as I walked into the house, I saw Sandra sitting on the couch, typing furiously on her phone. When she looked up and saw me, she startled, like she hadn't expected me home so soon. Her hand flew to her chest, clutching the phone like it was something precious. "Didn't mean to scare you," I said, trying to keep my tone light. But her reaction stayed with me. She'd never looked at me that way before, like I'd caught her doing something she wasn't supposed to. She recovered quickly, flashing me a quick smile. "Just texting a friend from work," she said, almost too casually. "We're planning a team outing next week. Just trying to bond outside of the office." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that all these little changes were just life. But something was gnawing at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. And that's when the call came. A couple of days after that incident, my phone rang late at night. I looked at the screen and didn't recognize the number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something about the timing, the feeling in my gut, made me pick up. "Hello," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, and then a woman's voice, quiet and hesitant. "Is this Sandra's husband?" "Yes," I said slowly, my heart starting to race. "Who's this?" "My name's Lisa. I don't know how to say this, but my husband, Mark, he's been seeing your wife." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. I stood there in the silence, phone pressed to my ear, my mind racing. She must have sensed my shock because she quickly added, "I have proof. I thought you deserved to know." And just like that, everything came crashing down. My hand shook as I ended the call. I stood there, staring at the phone, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath me. It was surreal, like I'd just been thrown into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Sandra? Cheating? It didn't make sense. We'd been together 15 years. We'd built a life together, a family. We had our routines, our traditions. She was my wife, my partner. I had never once doubted her loyalty. But now, I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, trying to steady myself. My mind was racing, replaying the phone call, trying to find some logical explanation, a way to dismiss it all as a terrible mistake. Maybe Lisa was wrong. Maybe she'd misunderstood something. But then she'd said she had proof. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I thought about the photos, the messages, the call log she'd promised to show me. If there was even a shred of truth to this, then Sandra hadn't just made a mistake. She'd been actively deceiving me. For how long? How many of those networking events had been with Mark? How many of those late nights at the office had been spent with someone else's husband? I felt a surge of anger that quickly gave way to disbelief. Sandra had always been ambitious, sure, but I'd never thought she'd risk everything for a fling. And with Mark, of all people, someone she'd introduced me to, someone she'd brought into our home, sat with at dinners, laughed with in our living room. The betrayal felt layered, tangled in lies I hadn't even known were there. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind cycling through every moment of our marriage, replaying every small change in her behavior, trying to pick out any clue I might have missed. Had there been signs? Subtle shifts I'd been too blind to see? The work dinners, the new clothes, the phone glued to her side. All of it seemed so obvious now, but at the time, I just trusted her. I'd brushed off every doubt because I believed we were solid. Because I believed in her. The next morning, I was barely functioning. Sandra asked me if I was feeling all right, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. I could hardly bring myself to look at her. There she was, sitting across from me, pouring herself a cup of coffee, acting like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just ripped my heart out. I muttered something about not sleeping well, and she shrugged, distractedly scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm building inside me. I spent the entire day in a fog, half distracted at work, barely able to focus on anything. Around midday, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. I hadn't even saved her number, but I knew it was her. "Are you free to meet today?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the strain beneath it. This wasn't easy for her, either. I could bring everything I've found. I thought it might help to see it in person. I agreed, my throat tight, and we arranged to meet at a small coffee shop on the other side of town, far from where anyone we knew would spot us. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I needed answers. If I was going to confront Sandra, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. When I walked into the coffee shop, I spotted Lisa immediately. She was sitting by the window, a few manila folders spread out on the table in front of her, her hands clasped around a mug. She looked up as I approached, her face a mixture of sympathy and steely determination. She was in her early 40s, like me, attractive, well-dressed, but with an air of exhaustion that mirrored my own. We exchanged brief introductions, and then she cut straight to the point. "I'm sorry it had to come to this," she said, her voice low and even. "I tried talking to Mark, asking him if he'd end things, but he kept lying to me. I thought you had a right to know." I nodded, unable to find the words. I felt like a stranger in my own life, like I'd been dragged into someone else's drama. Lisa reached for one of the folders and opened it, sliding it across the table to me. "These are some of the texts I found," she said, keeping her gaze steady. I printed them out because, well, it's easier than trying to explain. I looked down at the pages, the words blurring together as I tried to take in what I was seeing. The messages were intimate, playful, the kind of words Sandra used to say to me. But they weren't for me. They were for him. Every line hit me like a punch to the gut. There were pet names, plans to meet, even jokes about sneaking around. My hands clenched around the edge of the table, and I felt a rush of anger so intense I had to close my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. "There's more," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached for another folder, this one filled with photos. I confronted him about these. He tried to deny it at first, but she trailed off, clearly struggling to keep her composure. I forced myself to look. The photos were unmistakable. Sandra and Mark, sitting together at a bar, holding hands across a table, laughing together in ways she hadn't laughed with me in years. I saw shots of them leaving a hotel, her arm looped through his, her head resting on his shoulder. They looked like a couple, a real couple. "It's all here," Lisa said, closing the folder as I pushed it back across the table, unable to look at it any longer. "I know it's hard to see, but you deserve to know the truth." I couldn't respond. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, humiliation. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask Lisa how this had all happened without me noticing a thing. But what good would it do? The truth was right there, staring back at me in black and white. Sandra had been seeing another man, right under my nose, and I'd been too blind, too trusting, to see it. Lisa and I sat in silence for a while, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I realized we were both mourning, both grappling with the reality of being betrayed by the people we'd trusted most. After a while, she looked at me, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "It's strange," she said softly, "finding comfort in this and each other, I mean. I don't think I'd be getting through this if I didn't know I wasn't alone." I nodded, the words hitting closer to home than I'd expected. There was something grounding about being with her, about knowing that someone else understood this twisted sense of betrayal and anger. And for a brief moment, I felt a strange connection with her, a closeness I couldn't quite explain. Before we parted ways that day, Lisa suggested we meet again to check in and support each other as we figured out what to do next. I agreed, almost automatically feeling grateful for a lifeline in the midst of the chaos. She gave me a small, understanding smile, and as I walked out of the coffee shop, I realized that, for the first time since learning the truth, I felt something close to calm. But that calm wouldn't last. There was a storm coming, and Sandra had no idea. The days that followed my first meeting with Lisa felt like a blur. I'd go to work, go through the motions, but it was as if I were watching my own life from a distance, detached, numb. Every now and then, reality would hit me all over again, sharp and painful, like a fresh wound that hadn't begun to heal. My wife, Sandra, the woman I'd shared my life with, had been cheating on me, and I'd been the last to know. Lisa and I continued to meet over the next few weeks. I didn't plan on it at first, but each time we talked, it felt like I could finally breathe again. She understood what I was going through in a way that no one else could. Friends and family could offer sympathy, but they didn't know the specific kind of betrayal we were both enduring. With Lisa, I didn't need to explain myself, didn't need to hold back my anger or my hurt. She was living it too. We met in out-of-the-way coffee shops, quiet corners of the city where no one would know us, places where we could talk without interruptions. Each time, she'd bring something new, a text message she'd found, a photo she'd managed to retrieve from a shared drive on Mark's computer, another piece of evidence that cemented the truth I still struggled to accept. I'd look at each new detail with a mix of disbelief and detachment, almost like I was reading someone else's story. But the rage was always there, simmering under the surface, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, after looking over yet another set of texts between Sandra and Mark, texts that were flirtatious, teasing, and far too familiar, I felt something snap inside me. I pushed the papers away and looked at Lisa, who was watching me with the same haunted expression I'd seen in the mirror each morning. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. How could they do this? How could they throw everything away like it meant nothing? She looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. I ask myself the same question every day, she replied. I thought Mark loved me. I thought we had something worth fighting for. She shook her head, her voice bitter. But I guess some people can just lie to your face and not feel a thing. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to offer some kind of comfort, but the words wouldn't come. We were both trapped in the same hell, and there was no easy way out. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. I could feel the anger building up inside me, that familiar wave of betrayal and humiliation. And this time, I didn't try to hold it back. I wanted Sandra to hurt. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. As if reading my mind, Lisa spoke up. They don't deserve to get away with this, she said, her voice cold and resolute. They think they're untouchable, that they can do whatever they want without any consequences. I nodded, my hands clenched into fists. They've made us look like fools. I can't just let this go. She gave me a small, sad smile. Neither can I. Over the next few meetings, our conversations turned from shock and sadness to something sharper, something more focused. We started talking about what we wanted to do next, how we wanted to handle things. Lisa was planning on leaving Mark, filing for divorce the moment she had everything she needed. She'd already started gathering financial records, looking into her options. And I realized, listening to her, that I wanted the same thing. One evening, after we'd talked through her plans, she looked at me, her eyes soft but serious. I know this is hard, she said gently, reaching out to touch my hand. But you're not alone in this. We're in this together. Her hand on mine felt like a lifeline, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. We were both bruised and broken, trying to make sense of the wreckage our spouses had left behind. And in that moment, sitting across from her in a dimly lit corner booth, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was comfort. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was just the realization that someone else truly understood. Over the next few weeks, that connection grew stronger. We'd meet in the same out-of-the-way places, talking for hours about everything and nothing. I found myself looking forward to our meetings, drawn to the sense of calm she brought me. One night, after we'd shared a quiet dinner at a small Italian restaurant, she looked at me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. You know, she said slowly, her gaze fixed on me, we could both use something good in our lives right now. Her hand lingered on the table, just close enough that I could reach out if I wanted to. I hesitated, my mind racing, part of me unsure if this was the right thing to do. But the other part, the part that was angry and hurt, the part that wanted to forget, even just for a moment, won out. Without a word, I took her hand in mine, feeling her fingers intertwine with mine. And in that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace, as if this was the first thing that had made sense in a long time. It wasn't about love or even attraction. It was about finding someone who understood, someone who could help me feel something other than rage and despair. That night, I let myself forget about Sandra, about the lies, about the betrayal. For a few hours, I felt like a man again, someone worthy of connection, of comfort. Afterward, as we lay in the quiet, I felt a bittersweet calm wash over me. The hurt was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, but it felt more manageable somehow, less suffocating. Lisa and I didn't say much, just lying there, breathing in sync, sharing a silence that was more comforting than any words could have been. Eventually, as dawn broke through the curtains, I knew it was time to face reality. But this time, I wasn't alone. Lisa and I had made a choice to move forward, to take control of our own lives again. And as I got dressed, a plan began to take shape in my mind, a way to make sure Sandra understood exactly what she'd thrown away. The corporate gala was only a month away. It was one of the biggest events of the year, an evening Sandra always looked forward to, a chance to shine, to network, to be the perfect supportive wife in the eyes of everyone around us. And it would be the perfect stage to reveal the truth. I turned to Lisa, who was watching me with a knowing look, as if she could read my thoughts. You're going to expose her, aren't you? She asked quietly, a small smile playing on her lips. I nodded, my jaw set with newfound resolve. She's built a life on lies, I said, my voice steady. It's time everyone sees the truth. As I left, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. I was finally taking my life back, and Sandra was about to learn the true cost of betrayal. In the days leading up to the gala, I kept everything under wraps. I knew I couldn't afford to let anything slip, especially with Sandra already suspicious of my recent quietness. I'd stopped engaging in our usual conversations, giving her only the bare minimum of my attention. She noticed, of course. A few times, she even asked me if something was wrong, giving me the concerned look I used to believe was genuine. But I wasn't going to let her see behind the mask I was wearing now. She kept up the act, cooking my favorite meals, casually dropping mentions of the gala and how excited she was to attend with me. She even asked if I'd be interested in helping her pick out her dress, a request that nearly made me laugh in her face. Did she think we were still a team, the perfect couple? That she could act like the doting wife, and everything would just stay hidden? I played along, nodding here and there, giving short, polite responses that kept her at bay. The days crawled by, but every moment felt like one step closer to reclaiming the control I'd lost. I spent my free time rehearsing exactly what I'd say, picturing her reaction in my mind, visualizing the way her carefully constructed world would collapse in front of everyone she held dear. The morning of the gala, I watched her as she carefully went through her usual preparations, styling her hair, applying her makeup with painstaking attention to detail, inspecting every inch of herself in the mirror as she dressed. She chose an elegant black gown with delicate beading along the neckline, one I hadn't seen before. She looked perfect. It almost disgusted me. "You look nice," I said simply, keeping my expression neutral as I fastened my cufflinks, barely glancing at her reflection in the mirror. She gave me a bright smile, the kind that used to light up my world, back when I didn't know it was a lie. "Thanks, honey," she replied, giving a little twirl. "I wanted to look my best tonight. It's such an important event." "Oh, it will be," I said, smiling to myself. She didn't catch the edge in my voice, too busy checking her phone for messages, likely from Mark, the man who'd helped turn her into a stranger to me. As we rode to the gala, Sandra was her usual chatty self, filling the silence with stories from work, hints about future plans, things she thought would impress me. But I wasn't really listening. My mind was already at the gala, anticipating the speech, feeling the weight of the words I'd planned to say. This time, Sandra wouldn't be able to hide behind half-truths and excuses. She'd have nowhere to run. We arrived at the venue, an elegant ballroom filled with chandeliers, soft music, and the hum of laughter and conversation. Sandra's face lit up as we entered, and she reached for my arm, the picture of a devoted wife. I let her cling to me, watching her put on her best performance yet, playing the role she'd cultivated over the years. The irony of it all was almost amusing. As we mingled with the crowd, I noticed a few of her co-workers eyeing her with admiration, oblivious to the woman she truly was. Sandra exchanged pleasantries with them, laughing a bit too loudly, her eyes bright and eager, basking in their attention. I watched her charm them, talking about our wonderful marriage and dropping hints about her career progress, as if we were the perfect couple. I felt a surge of anger, but I held it back, knowing that soon enough, her little fantasy would come crashing down. Halfway through the evening, as we made our rounds through the room, I spotted Mark across the ballroom. He was dressed in a sharp suit, looking every bit the polished businessman, completely unaware that tonight would change everything. He met my gaze for a split second, gave me a friendly nod, and then turned his attention back to someone else. The audacity of it all, the confidence, the ease with which he moved through the crowd, made my blood boil. But I kept my face blank, biding my time. Finally, the time came for the speeches. Sandra and I took our seats near the stage, and I felt her hand rest lightly on my knee, a small, affectionate gesture that would have meant something to me once. Now, it felt like a betrayal, as if her touch was tainted by all the lies. I brushed her hand away gently, and she glanced at me with a slight frown, but I gave her nothing to work with. I was focused, my mind set on what I needed to do. The MC called my name, and I stood up, adjusting my tie as I made my way to the podium. I could feel the weight of the room's attention on me, every eye trained on the stage, waiting to hear what I'd say. Sandra sat up a little straighter, a proud smile on her face, clearly expecting the usual praise, a loving mention of my supportive wife, who'd been by my side through everything. But I had something else planned. I took a deep breath, glancing around the room, making brief eye contact with a few of my colleagues, friends, and family members who'd come to support us. The room was quiet, expectant, the usual rustling and murmurs stilled. Sandra was watching me, her expression warm, completely unaware of what was coming. "Good evening, everyone," I began, keeping my voice calm and steady. "It's a privilege to be here tonight, celebrating another successful year with such incredible, dedicated people." I paused, my gaze drifting back to Sandra, letting the silence settle just long enough for her to notice the intensity in my eyes. Her smile faltered slightly, but she still had no idea. "Tonight," I continued, "I want to take a moment to recognize not only our hard work and achievements, but the people who stand beside us, who support us through every challenge. The people who show us the true meaning of loyalty and integrity." Sandra's smile faded just a bit more. She glanced around the room, as if seeking reassurance from the faces around her. But I held her gaze, not letting her look away. "I've been lucky enough to experience that loyalty and support firsthand," I said, my voice soft but steady. "But sometimes loyalty means stepping back and recognizing when someone close to us has strayed from the path we thought we were on together." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, faint whispers and confused glances. Sandra's face had turned pale, her eyes widening slightly. I could see the first flickers of panic beginning to settle in, but she kept her composure, sitting rigidly, waiting for me to explain myself. I didn't give her the chance. "You know," I said, letting my gaze drift back to her, "it's hard to find people who truly embody honesty and integrity. People who don't betray your trust, who don't lie to your face while pretending everything is fine." Sandra's hand flew to her chest, her expression frozen in horror as the reality of my words began to sink in. I felt a grim satisfaction seeing the realization dawn on her face, watching her mask crumble. "And so tonight, I want to extend my gratitude to one individual who has been especially committed to forging new relationships." I continued, turning my gaze toward Mark. His eyes widened, his face going pale as he realized he was caught. "Thank you, Mark," I said, letting each word hang in the air. "Thank you for showing me the value of honesty. Your dedication has been truly enlightening." A hush fell over the room. The weight of what I'd just said settled heavily over the crowd, a shocked silence punctuated only by the faint clinking of glasses and a few murmurs as people processed what they'd just heard. Sandra's face was as white as a sheet, her hand trembling as she reached toward me, as if to pull me off the stage to stop this public unmasking. But I didn't even look at her. I handed the microphone to the next speaker and stepped down, walking straight past her as she sat there, humiliated, exposed, her world crashing down around her. I didn't look back. I walked out of the ballroom, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. I knew that I'd finally taken back control of my life, and Sandra was left to deal with the mess she'd made. As I walked out of the ballroom, leaving Sandra and her lies behind me, I felt strangely empty. For months, I'd imagined this moment, pictured her shock and humiliation as the truth unraveled in front of everyone. But now that it had actually happened, there was no satisfaction, no triumphant feeling, just a hollow ache that seemed to sit in my chest, heavy and unyielding. The ride home was a blur. I couldn't bear to stay at the gala after what had happened, and the thought of seeing Sandra's face, of watching her scramble for explanations or excuses, made my stomach turn. Instead, I returned to our house, the place I'd once thought of as a sanctuary, a safe haven from the world. Now it felt like a cage, filled with memories that were nothing more than lies. I spent the night in the guest room, the door locked, drowning in silence. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the evening in my mind. Every word, every look of shock from the crowd, every tear that had welled up in Sandra's eyes. And yet, despite everything, there was no relief. Betrayal leaves a strange kind of wound, one that doesn't heal simply by getting revenge. I was starting to realize that my anger hadn't erased the pain. It had only masked it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of knocking on the guest room door. It was Sandra, her voice soft, hesitant, pleading. "Honey, please, can we talk?" I didn't answer. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, wondering what she could possibly have to say. Did she think an apology would fix this? That a few words could erase the months of lies? The betrayal? But the knocking continued, persistent and desperate. Eventually, I opened the door. Sandra stood there, her face red and swollen from crying, her hands clasped in front of her as if she were holding onto some fragile hope. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just hear me out." I folded my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You've got 5 minutes," I said coldly, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much this hurt me. She launched into a frantic, tearful explanation, stumbling over her words, trying to justify the unjustifiable. She claimed it had been a mistake, that she'd felt lost and disconnected, and that Mark had been there at a vulnerable time. She threw out every excuse in the book, from feeling neglected to being stressed at work, but none of it landed. It was all just noise, meaningless words that fell flat in the face of what she'd done. When she realized I wasn't buying it, she changed tactics. She started talking about our life together, reminding me of all the memories we'd shared, the years we'd built together. She brought up our family traditions, the Sunday dinners, the vacations, the times we'd laughed and celebrated. She even tried to hold my hand, to draw me into an embrace, but I stepped back, pulling away from her touch as if it burned. "This isn't about memories," I said quietly, my voice low but steady. "It's about trust. And you destroyed that the moment you chose to lie to me, to cheat." Sandra sobbed, her face crumpling as she realized the finality in my tone. But even then, she didn't give up. Over the next few days, she tried everything. She wrote me letters, long, rambling notes filled with apologies and promises to change. She texted me constantly, begging for a chance to talk, to make things right. She even called her parents, asking them to intervene, to speak to me on her behalf. I got a call from her mother, tearful and pleading, asking me to give Sandra another chance and think of all the years we'd spent together. But it was too late. Each plea, each apology, only solidified my decision. Sandra didn't want me back because she loved me or regretted her actions. She wanted me back because she couldn't face the consequences of what she'd done. Her desperation was about preserving the life she'd built on lies, not about fixing what was broken. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. Sandra tried to argue, to negotiate, to plead her way out of it, but I'd made up my mind. I wanted a clean break, a way to move forward without the weight of her betrayal hanging over me. The lawyer I hired was thorough, efficient, and had dealt with enough cases like mine to know exactly what to do. The proceedings were grueling, drawn out, filled with paperwork and meetings that seemed to drag on endlessly. Sandra fought tooth and nail for every asset, every piece of property, but I was resolute. I made sure to retain as much of our shared finances as possible, knowing that she'd already taken enough from me. In the end, she walked away with very little, forced to confront the reality of her choices. I knew that some of her friends had turned on her after the gala. Word had spread quickly, and by the time we started the divorce process, her reputation had taken a serious hit. She'd gone from being the picture-perfect wife to the woman who destroyed her own marriage, and people weren't quick to forget that. Even her family seemed to distance themselves, disappointed and ashamed of the spectacle she'd created. The first few months after the divorce were strange. I'd spent so long focused on revenge, on exposing Sandra and taking back control, that once it was over, I felt lost. I'd won, in a way, but it didn't feel like a victory. The house was empty, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed, and the silence was suffocating. I threw myself into my work, pouring all my energy into the business. I took on new projects, worked late into the night, anything to keep my mind off the loneliness that had settled in. Friends reached out, offering support, and I even went to a few family gatherings trying to piece together a sense of normalcy. But there was no escaping the reality of what had happened. Sandra was gone. Our marriage was over, and I was left to rebuild from the ground up. Lisa and I stayed in touch, meeting occasionally to catch up and share updates on our lives. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a bond forged through shared pain. And although we never rekindled the physical connection we'd shared, there was a comfort in knowing that someone else understood. She, too, had moved on from Mark, and in some ways, our lives had mirrored each other's. Two people broken by betrayal, learning to find their footing again. Looking back now, I see everything more clearly. It's strange how betrayal distorts everything, turns love into bitterness, memories into lies, and hope into cynicism. For a long time, I believed that exposing Sandra, making her pay for what she'd done, would somehow set me free. I thought that tearing down the perfect image she'd so carefully crafted would give me closure. And to be fair, that moment at the gala did give me a certain satisfaction, a rush of vindication as I saw the shock and humiliation dawn on her face. But here's the truth. Revenge is hollow. The satisfaction fades, and you're left with an ache that nothing can soothe. That moment didn't erase the pain, and it didn't fill the emptiness she'd left behind. At first, I struggled to accept that. I'd spent months waiting for that night, building up the moment in my mind as if it would be the key to moving on. And yet, when it was over, when Sandra was finally exposed and isolated, the hurt was still there, lodged deep inside me, refusing to fade. That's the thing about betrayal. It leaves a wound that heals differently, if it heals at all. You can patch it up, cover it with layers of new experiences, but the scar remains. I used to wonder if it would always be this way, if the memory of what she did would haunt me forever. But in a strange, almost twisted way, I'm grateful for what happened, because that betrayal forced me to confront the truth, not just about Sandra, but about myself. I'd spent years convincing myself that my marriage was something sacred, something real. I believed in the story we'd written together, clinging to it even when the signs of rot were right there in front of me. Sandra's betrayal wasn't just a crack in our marriage. It was a mirror reflecting back all the illusions I'd clung to, all the lies I'd told myself to keep the facade intact. I realized then that sometimes the hardest truth to face is the one we've known all along, buried beneath layers of denial and wishful thinking. What I've learned from this experience is that love, real love, isn't enough on its own. Love without trust, without loyalty, is a house built on sand. And loyalty, true loyalty, means more than shared memories or traditions. It's about integrity, about standing by each other even when life gets hard, even when temptation rears its head. I thought Sandra and I had that, but I was wrong. I'd built my life on an illusion, and it took her betrayal to show me the truth. And as painful as that truth was, it was also freeing, because once you see things for what they are, you can finally begin to let go. In the months that followed the divorce, I spent a lot of time alone, reflecting, trying to make sense of it all. I questioned everything, my choices, my values, the kind of person I'd been in that marriage. There were times I wondered if I'd somehow push Sandra away, if I'd missed something crucial. But in the end, I realized that people make their own choices. Sandra chose to lie, to betray, and no amount of soul-searching on my part could change that. I had to learn to separate her actions from my own worth, to remind myself that her choices were a reflection of who she was, not of who I am. For anyone reading this, for anyone who's been through something similar or who might be struggling with betrayal, my advice is simple but hard one. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore the red flags, the subtle shifts that tell you something isn't right. I ignored those signs for years, rationalizing every change in Sandra's behavior, convincing myself that everything was fine. I wanted so badly to believe in the life we'd built that I ignored the cracks forming beneath the surface. And by the time I faced the truth, it was too late. But here's the other side of it. Don't let someone else's choices define your worth. I spent years believing in a marriage that didn't exist, a relationship that was built on lies, but that doesn't mean I'm any less valuable. Sandra's betrayal was about her flaws, her weaknesses, her inability to be honest. It wasn't about me. For a long time, I let her actions chip away at my confidence, at my self-worth. But I've come out the other side, stronger and wiser, ready to build a life on my own terms. Moving forward hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary. I've had to unlearn so many things, to rebuild my identity from the ground up, to let go of the life I thought I'd have. But in doing so, I've gained a clarity I never had before. I know now what I want and what I won't tolerate, and I'm not afraid to set boundaries, to protect myself from anyone who can't offer honesty and respect. That's the real lesson in all of this. That self-respect, that inner strength is something no one else can take from you. As for Sandra, I don't know where she is or what she's doing, and to be honest, I don't care. She made her choice, and now I've made mine. She taught me one final lesson, that sometimes the only way to truly love yourself is to walk away from someone who doesn't. I've finally done that, and in the process, I found a peace I didn't think was possible. Life has a strange way of balancing itself, of giving you what you need when you're ready to receive it. I may have lost the marriage I thought I wanted, but I've gained something far more valuable, a deeper understanding of who I am and the strength to move forward. So, to anyone out there struggling with betrayal, remember this. The road to healing is long and difficult, but it's also transformative. You'll learn things about yourself you never knew. You'll discover reserves of strength you didn't realize you had. And someday, you'll look back and see that the pain, as brutal as it was, shaped you into someone resilient, someone who knows their worth. Betrayal can break you, but it can also rebuild you if you let it. I've let it. I'm not the same man I was before, and I wouldn't want to be. Life goes on, and so will I.